reeds whisper, ancient scrolls unfold, prophets penned a story, truth written in gold. Man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, despised and rejected, no relief. Silent like a lamb, slaughtered for the guilt. Crimson rivers flow when the temples tilt. By his stripes we healed, wounds bore the cost. Pierced for transgressions, the lost and lost. Who believed the report? The arms stretched wide, roots in dry ground, no beauty to pride. Isaiah saw him, the servant who bled, took on the weight where the guilty tread. Proof in the pain, prophecy true. He died, he rose, now life's renewed. Laid on him the iniquity of us all, crushed for the sins, heard redemption's call. No deceit in his mouth, no violence in his hand. The innocent lamb, fulfilling God's plan. Grave with the wicked, rich in his death. The world turned dark at his final breath. Prolonged his days, he shall see his seed. Victory written where the scars would bleed.
How's it going, everybody? Thanks again for joining another live. This is ask your questions in the chat. Ask your questions live if you want to. This is open to anybody. You don't have to be a believer or non-believer. You don't have to be, you can be a believer. You could be a doubting Christian. You could just be somebody who has questions about the New Testament. And so, yeah, I'm just going to be running these for a little while, and we'll kind of expand as we go along. But I'm here to answer your questions about, is the New Testament reliable historically, and all of those good things. And so, yeah, anyway, so again, if you got questions, throw them in the chat. That's totally fine. I'll answer them. Obviously, once the chat really starts to roll, it might be hard to see your questions. And so if you want to do a super chat, that does help the channel, and it would definitely help me see your chat. And again, the join link is in the chat. It is pinned if you want to come up and ask your question and all that other good stuff. So Aaron asks, have you seen the Trent Horn and Alex O'Connor debate? I have not seen it yet. It is definitely on my watch later list. My friend Jonathan McClatchy and I talked a little bit about possibly doing, just over text, a review of the debate. It's my understanding, I haven't seen it though, so I don't want to assume, but that Trent took a little bit more of a minimal approach, whereas Alex, you know what he's going to do? He's going to throw a bunch of objections against the historical reliability of the Gospels, and most of those aren't good. We might even watch a few Alex O'Connor shorts and just kind of talk about some of his objections, just to fill the time if we don't have enough questions or callers at some point. But so yeah, I'm super interested. And we'll probably review it in the future on some kind of a live, maybe watch some clips. Obviously we won't watch the whole thing, and so stay on the lookout for that. But yeah, good question, Aaron, appreciate it. Somebody asked, is John's gospel reliable? Boy, that's a big question. I would say yes, absolutely. Why don't I give you a little taste of why I think John's gospel is reliable? So they have some slides. Let me pull that up. You guys know me. I got the slides. Roby sliding. Let's see. Is that right? Oh, I gotta shut this other screen down real quick. All right, share screen. All right, present. We could just kind of talk about, is John's gospel reliable, for a little bit, and I'll get back to the chat, give you a little taste on why I would say John's gospel is reliable. A lot of people say, well, John sounds so much different, and there's so many different things in the synoptics than we find in John's gospel. I'm skipping around here. But I would argue that John is a very good historical source. First of all, I mean, the disciple does claim to be an eyewitness, right? John 21:24, he says, this is the disciple who is bearing witness, who has written these things, and we know his testimony to be true. We know, might be just a brief editorial endorsement, not multiple authors, similar to what we see in Romans 16:22, where Paul's scribe Tertius just kind of throws himself in there. But then also, so yeah, don't let that we throw you. I know that's like an objection that people raise, but also John 19:35, he says, he who saw it has borne witness, his testimony is true. This is right after the Roman soldier throws a spear into John's side, right? Also, the same author for First John, the same author for John is the same author for First John, should say, and he says, "What we have heard, seen with our eyes, touched with our hands, and proclaimed to you." So he's saying, "Hey, we're witnesses here, and we have seen the risen Jesus, basically." And so this is an author who's claiming firsthand witness of Jesus's ministry. Um, so can we test those claims? Well, I think we can. Let's just kind of jump ahead here in the slides. But one thing that we can do is we can test difficult facts that the author of John gets right, things that you couldn't just look up using like Google or Wikipedia, but things that show like accurate local knowledge and getting like hard things right, right? This would show that this person would be knowledgeable. This would show that this person would probably be scrupulous. And in some cases, this will even show that the author is like very close up to the facts and is actually a witness of the things that he's recording. So let me run through a few of these. First of all, there's this weird statement in John 1:46 where a disciple by the name of Nathaniel is basically told, like, "Hey, we found the Messiah. He's from Nazareth." And his response is, "Nazareth? Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" We're all familiar with this saying. Like, and I mean, it sounds kind of harsh. Like, what's the deal with Nazareth? Why is Nazareth known to be like this kind of place where he doesn't expect anything good to come out of Nazareth? Nathaniel is a Judean, right? And then we see also the Judean Pharisees in John 7:52 say, "Search and see that no prophet arises from Galilee," right? So here they show this prejudice against Galilee as a region. Nathaniel shows this prejudice against Nazareth. And so there's this Judean contempt for the Galileans that's on display here, right? Well, if you actually look up in the Babylonian Talmud in a tractate called Reuben 53a, it talks about the children of Judah. And you can look this up. I mean, I could pull up the references if you guys really want me to. But it says the children of Judah retained all that they learned, but the Galileans, however, did not. Right. And so here we see in the Talmud itself this same kind of disdain for people from Galilee. Right. Here's another phrase from the same tractate: "The Galileans had many teachers and did not retain anything." So it's like, whoa, okay, that's harsh. Here's another one: "Thou Galilean fool, did not our sages say thou shouldst not converse much with a woman? Don't talk to too many women there, you Galilean doofuses," right? And so the biblical scholar J.B. Lightfoot says foolish Galilean was the inevitable address when a Galilean appeared in dialogue for the Judeans. And so what we see here in like a very subtle, undesigned, kind of casual way, what John drops in his gospel is the exact same um, disdain for the Galileans, for the Nazarenes in Judea, which was south, right? That's just one thing. You might say, well, that's kind of small. But here's another. It says in John chapter 2, verses 20, Jesus has just cleansed the temple. They are hot. They're mad. They're like, "Dude, who gave you the right to cleanse the temple? By what authority do you have to do this?" And Jesus says, "Well, if you destroy this temple in 3 days, I'll raise it up." So they don't understand what the heck he's talking about. And so they say, "It's taken us 46 years to build this temple. You're going to raise it up in 3 days." Okay, so we can actually corroborate this externally outside of the Bible. And we find out from reading Josephus in Antiquities that Herod the Great actually began the construction of the temple in 18 BC. So calculating from this date, Jesus' first confrontation in the temple at the beginning of his public ministry would have taken place in about AD 27, 28. Well, if we compare that with Luke 3:1, where Jesus begins his ministry and you first hear John the Baptist preaching and all that other stuff, it says that this happened in the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar. Well, we also can do some checking outside of the Bible and see, and this corroborates even John's statement. We read that Augustus died in 14 AD, but Tiberius actually did become co-emperor. He became co-regent in AD 12, and his reign is often dated from the earlier point. So what does this do? This puts John the Baptist public ministry in the AD 26-27 period, just right before the date John indirectly discloses for Jesus' exchange with the Jews about the temple. So Jesus' public ministry begins just about the times that John is shut down. That's what we see in the Gospels, right? And so all of these just kind of dovetail in a way that, like, obviously the author of John isn't like, yeah, I'm going to look up Suetonius and I'm looking up Josephus. He's just reporting this, but then we corroborate Suetonius, we corroborate Luke, we corroborate Josephus with John, and all of these four facts kind of converge on the date of the cleansing of the temple. And I do have a caller, so I'll bring him up in a second here. But yeah, it's a good question, Kobe, and it's something that I go into detail in like other streams. And so, look at that one. I'm trying to remember what it's called. I think it's something about Jesus claiming to be God, because I just talk about the reliability of John in that, particularly because obviously the strongest statements of Jesus claiming to be God do come from John, although I do argue in that stream that there's very strong statements in the synoptics as well that are consistent with John. So check that out. This is just like the very tip of the iceberg. I've just given you a couple. So anyways, hope that helps a little bit. Good question. All right, Bible lover 1234. Hey bro, what's up, man? You're muted.
Good morning, brother Testify. I'm a Christian. Is that allowed? Is that allowed?
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Good morning. Firstly, I do appreciate all the videos you've done. The short form animation style is very, very fun to watch, and also they're very informational. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
On your last video regarding I think it was undesigned coincidence. One of the last videos you did, I left a comment, and I was saying it was about the quote unquote contradictions in the resurrection accounts.
Okay.
I left a comment. I was just asking about in the Gospels we see different times where there are stories that are recounted or sayings that are recounted in like different contexts and different areas. And usually when you read like commentators and exegetes, they'll usually speak of these being just Jesus repeating himself in a different context or a different group of people.
Sure.
Or like the woman with the issue of blood. I mean, sorry, the woman who anointed Jesus' feet, like Luke 7 verses like Matthew 26, Mark 14, John I think 12. They'll usually say like Luke 7 is just a different story because there are some differences between how it's accounted in Luke 7 versus the ones in the other Gospels. So what would you say? What would you say to those things? Like when Jesus repeats a saying, are they like repetitions, or was it like the authors, having more liberty in where they place stuff? Like, what would you say regarding these sayings that might be repeated or stuff like that?
Sure. I don't think that the authors had like liberty to just change the facts. They might narrate things at times like achronologically or something like that. But I don't think, based on what we see of what the gospel authors are like and the way that they're just like, again, very knowledgeable, very scrupulous. They seem to be close up to the facts. They don't seem like the kind of authors that felt like they had the liberty to just straight up change facts and completely like put words in Jesus's mouth or put words into somebody else's mouth that maybe somebody else said, and all of those kind of different things. I know there are New Testament scholars, even people who claim to be conservative evangelical Christians, who do argue that, like say like Dr. Mike Lacona and some others. For a good book on that particular topic is The Mirror or the Mask by Lydia McGrew. I can't recommend that more highly. And so, no, I don't think that they do that. And so I think, like, say for instance, like this, there's the Sermon on the Mount, right? And then there's also Luke has a version, but it's the Sermon on the Plain. Well, we see a little bit of variation, but a lot of the same kind of teaching going on in those two sermons. But to me, it's like, why couldn't Jesus given a similar address and like a different setting in a different location? I mean, I've been at my church for 20 some years. I kind of have a good idea of some of the things that my pastor is going to say. Sometimes I can just straight up finish his sentences. I can know what passages he's going to go to sometimes before he goes to them based on the thing he said previously. And so, I mean, teachers just consistently repeat themselves all the time. There's no problem with that, like whatsoever. So I don't see any issue there. Now, as far as like something like the repentant woman in Luke chapter 7 that you're referring to, and we see like a different story in John where we find out that it's Mary and she anoints his head with oil and all that other stuff. Or maybe you're referring to a different one. I'm not sure. But I definitely think they're two different stories. And why couldn't two similar things happen? So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Just one thing on what you said. You mentioned Luke 6 mentioning a level place and Matthew mentioning the mount. So would
Mhm.
you say those are the same story? I didn't kind of get your answer there. Would you say
Oh
those are the
yeah.
same? Like,
No, I think it's two separate occasions where he's teaching
mm-hmm.
basically the same sermon. There's some switched up language in there, but like that's
Yeah.
just kind of how like normal people speak. It's just like I could give a similar talk at like say, um, I don't know, the Ratio Christi group at the University of uh, Alabama, and another talk at the Ratio Christi group at the University of like Caltech or something. And I could say basically the same things for the most part. And at the same time, there's going to be some variation based on the occasion and different things like that. And so, um, why couldn't it just be two different, like two similar sermons in two different settings?
Mhm.
Instead of just saying like, well, Luke changed the setting to the plane because XYZ theological, thing that I can pull out of my rear end and invent, is
Yeah.
is what a lot of scholars do. It's kind
Yeah.
of it's kind of weird, and so yeah, I just don't see a problem with Jesus repeating himself. Any good teacher repeats themselves constantly,
You're right.
right?
Okay. Thank you for that. I appreciate those answers. That's all I had to ask.
Oh, that's all you had. Okay, no
Yeah.
problem, man. I appreciate you coming up. Thanks for the questions.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. We got Kumbo. I hope I said that right. If I didn't, please correct me.
Yeah, that's Kumbo.
Kumbo. Okay. Yeah, Kumbo. Thanks for joining, man. What's up?
Yeah, I just wanted to share that. Well, two questions.
Yeah.
As a bit of a background, at least I've been following you since maybe you were around maybe either less than 1,000, less than 2,000 subscribers. So I've been following your
Oh
content
wow.
for a while. It's been pretty helpful,
Well, thank you.
even in my own learning of apologetics. I think one of the best videos I've liked was the one where you're dealing with the anonymous gospel theory and how
Mhm,
you account about how Augustine encounters the same issue
mhm,
with Thassus the Manichaean. What was interesting about it is that people really haven't changed. The same thing they were arguing thousands of years ago is the
mhm.
same thing we're sort of dealing with now with skeptics. But yeah, getting into that, I guess what would you say is your argument for the early dating of the Gospels? And then the next question would be, if you could summarize, or you don't have to summarize, what would be the argument for the resurrection, like how we know it's true?
Oh, sure. Yeah, no problem. Those are both good questions. I appreciate that. As far as the early dating of the Gospels go, most scholars are going to, even if they give like a later dating, like say somebody like Bart Ehrman, he would probably say Mark is 70. John, or excuse me, Matthew and Luke are like 80, 85. John will be somewhere pushed out further, like 90 or so. Even then, I still think, contrary to Bart, like he kind of acts like everyone's just going to kind of keel off and die, even though the church fathers say that John lived to be an old man, right? And that's why they asked him to give us a different gospel, like a spiritual gospel, and that's in forget which one. I want to say that's in the Muratorian canon where that statement is made. But anyways, it's still within living memory, and so like the question of dating is, while interesting, is like sort of secondary importance as long as the gospels aren't written outside of living memory. Um, then I don't see why it's a problem for Christians at all. Because what we can do is we can just take a look at the text inside of the Gospels and find, external confirmations, undesigned coincidences, um, and different things like that. We could show that the Gospels are like very, very reliable, right? And so, but I do, however, think that there is one good argument for why they would be dated early. And while I won't go into like tons and tons of detail, basically it has to do with the book of Acts and how um, Paul is sent to Rome. He has appealed to Caesar. He is basically going to go on trial and talk to Caesar and defend himself, right? And so this court case never happens in the book of Acts. And if you think about it, that's extremely weird because the purpose of the book in Acts is like there's court scene after court scene after court scene after court scene, right? You see like in Acts chapter 5, like the 12 are brought before I believe it's the if it's not the Sanhedrin, it's yeah, I believe it is the Sanhedrin, right? Jesus, of course, has his whole scenes. He's even sent to Herod at one point in Luke's gospel. He's also before Caiaphas, he's also before Pilate. And then you have Acts chapter 22. Paul is basically before speaks before a group of Jews. Then he speaks to a high priest in Acts chapter 23. Acts chapter 24, he's before Felix. Acts 26, he's before Agrippa, right? And so there's all these court scenes. Luke loves court scenes. And you're going to tell me like the most important court scene of all is like not going to actually even be in the book. And so we know that Paul died probably roughly around anywhere between, I want to say 68. And then of course he did travel and do more. He wrote more letters after he was in that particular period. And so most people, or excuse me, Adolf Harnack, who was a skeptical, kind of more of a skeptical, critical scholar, dated Acts to 62 because of this whole thing. He just is like, this doesn't make sense. Now, some people will push back and they'll say, well, Eric, that's just an argument from silence, but that's not an argument from silence. It's actually an argument from the very purpose of the book, which, like, again, was all these court scenes that Luke just loves. I mean, there's even a court scene with Paul before the guy in Acts chapter 18, Gallio, right? And so it'd just be weird. And so it doesn't really make sense. And so if Acts is 62, well, then the Gospel of Luke has to be even earlier. And then if Luke is dependent upon Mark's Gospel, at least somewhat, which I believe that he was, then that pushes Mark back into the 50s for sure. And even Maurice Casey, an atheist New Testament scholar, and James Crossley, another atheist New Testament scholar, do date Mark's Gospel into the 40s. Inspiring Philosophy, Michael Jones actually has a video on the dating of Mark's Gospel if you want to check that out. And so that's why I would date that's the main reason why I would say that I think the Gospels are early. Now, John still could be late. I don't know. It still could be 90s, and it doesn't matter to me. But I think the Synoptics definitely are probably much earlier than that. Also, Matthew does speak about some antiquated things that would be kind of like hard for his audience to understand if it was after the temple was destroyed. Like he talks about the Pharisees swearing by the gold of the temple and different things like that. Those are a few things. And so I have a whole list here. Maybe I'll pull it up. But anyways, yeah, that is why I would say that Luke Acts is definitely early and Mark is early. Does that make sense? I think you're muted, Kumbo. Just checking your understanding. Yeah, maybe I can unmute you. Oh, no, I can't. You're muted. Can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you now. I think the network must have cut out. I didn't hear the last thing you said.
Oh, okay.
Last thing I heard.
I was just
you were summarizing it.
Yeah. I was just checking your understanding.
Yeah.
Like, does that make sense?
Yeah. It makes sense.
Let me
anticipating Paul's soon. Like it would be strange if Luke doesn't write about Paul's death. Right. It's like sort of waiting for that Caesar, the appeal to Caesar.
Yeah. Another argument for like the early dating of Matthew would be in Matthew 17:24-27. It talks about Jesus approving of paying the temple tax because he didn't want to, offend the Jews. If you remember that, they kind of come to him and they're like, hey, does your teacher pay the temple tax? And they're like, and there's that whole kind of strange story where he says, hey, Peter, go catch the fish and there'll be a coin in his mouth and all that kind of stuff. But Josephus tells us that the temple tax after the destruction of 70 AD, this is in Jewish War 766, it says that tax actually became a tax for Jupiter's temple in Rome. So it'd be kind of weird, I'm not saying like it's a knockdown proof, but it'd be weird for like Matthew to have a saying like that in there if it was written that late, right? Or he also talks about being reconciled to someone you've offended after making your offering at the altar in Matthew 5:23-24. It says, hey, before you come and bring your offering at the altar, like be reconciled to your brother first. Well, that would be a teaching that his disciples could no longer follow unless the temple was still standing, right? And so there's just like little things like that. They're not knockdown proofs, but again, I think they're things that point in that direction of it being earlier.
That's good. I never thought about the argument with the temple tax.
Yeah, yeah. And so now you asked about the resurrection. And so the argument for the resurrection, I would just say I'll kind of use minimal facts as a foil. And so I'll just as a comparison, basically. So like people like Mike Lacona and Gary Habermas, they're going to argue that basically virtually all scholars will agree that Paul is quoting an early early Christian creed, likely that he received from the saints of Jerusalem, shortly after his conversion, right? And we're talking about Acts 15. I'm sure you're familiar with it, where it talks about the appearances, that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures. And then it goes into the appearances. He appeared to Peter and the 12, right? And then I think that's kind of where the creed stops. But anyway, the point is they'll just say everybody agrees with that, that's early. And so this is what they say they saw. Group hallucinations aren't really a thing. And so the best explanation is really that Jesus kind of rose from the dead because they didn't lie about it and all that other kind of stuff. And so anyways, that's probably somebody's going to say that's a straw man. That's terrible. And maybe it is, but it's just giving a very quick and dirty kind of explanation of it. Maximal case will take the facts from the Gospels and say like, no, there's, we need to do better than that, because what Paul doesn't do is he doesn't tell you in that creed what the appearances were like, other that they were to a group. Okay. And so we don't think that would be sufficient. We think you're not rational to believe that you've experienced some kind of miracle unless you have like actual unmistakable evidence. And so the kind of resurrection appearances that we see in the Gospels are not the kind of appearances that like they could easily be mistaken about. And so, like for example, let me see if I can pull this up here. Oh, no, that's not this. That's not the right one. Luke 24. Let me pull up a note here. Same. Yeah, see my hands. I think this is it. Yeah. And so the appearances that we see in the Gospels are not the kind of things that you could easily be mistaken about. So in the 1 Corinthians creed, like I was saying, we're not told what the appearances are like. Was it brief? Was it quick? Was it from a distance? Like, we don't really know, right? And so what we're going to say in a maximal case is that we need the actual like details of the appearances in order to know that the apostles are actually rational. And so there's a ton of variety in the resurrection appearances in the Gospels, right? And so Jesus appears to them in Judea. He appears to them in Jerusalem. He appears to them in Galilee. He preaches or appears to them, in towns and cities and on the countryside and in the road, indoors, outdoors. There's verses for all of these. You can see my notes here. He comes and sees them in the morning, right? He visits them in the evening. He comes by prior appointment. He just shows up without prior appointment. There's close-up encounters where like he's eating broiled fish with people, or inviting them to touch him, and all that other kind of stuff, like with Thomas, or like with the disciples in Luke chapter 24:39, right? Or close-up encounters where like women like take hold of his feet and actually worship him, right? He's distant and initially unrecognized in certain stories, but then he's like all up close and in person, and recognized, right? Mary again touches his feet in John chapter 20, or touches him, period. And like, how could she be mistaken about that? And she recognizes Jesus, right? And so he appears to individuals, he appears in groups, and in meal contexts, all these other kind of things, right? Talking, conversing, And Luke says that it's over a period of 40 days, right? In Acts chapter 1 and verse 3. So the point is, it would be really difficult to be mistaken about this. This isn't a brief or confusing episode, right? And so now our argument is basically we're going to argue that the Gospels actually reflect the unembellished testimony of what the eyewitnesses actually claimed. And the way that we're going to prove that is we're going to show what the authors are like. Are they honest? Are they scrupulous? Are they close up to the facts? Are they knowledgeable? That's going to give us an idea of what the authors are like. And so if they're not the kind of authors who feel like they can just invent details, make up stories, embellish things, but they're like truthful people who know what they're talking about, then that shows what the authors are like. And so at the very least, that shows that what they're recording reflects the unembellished testimony of what the apostles said that they saw. That doesn't just, we're not saying gospels are reliable, therefore resurrection happened. We're just saying this reflects the unembellished testimony. And so the content of their claims makes it really difficult to say that they're lying. And so now we're going to talk about the context of their claims, right? Were they actually persecuted? Because they made these claims in a dangerous environment. Jesus had just been crucified, right? And they're making this claim to a hostile audience. And so, yeah, we're going to talk about, were they willing to suffer for these things? And again, this is something I don't think the minimal facts argument can do, because there's a ton of pushback right now. Or, were the apostles like really willing to suffer or not? But if we look at the book of Acts, they were abundantly willing to suffer, right? I mean, Peter gets in their face. He says that they denied the holy and righteous one and they killed the author of life. He's confronting the very people who were like saying Jesus should be crucified. They're arrested. Peter and John are arrested in Acts chapter 4 in order not to speak in Jesus' name. And they say, no, we're not going to do that. Acts chapter 5, all the apostles are arrested. They're threatened. They're beaten. They still continue preaching. And then in Acts chapter 7, Stephen is stoned, which basically would serve as a warning shot to anybody who wants to preach Jesus in Jerusalem. And yet, like, that's a warning shot to the apostles, right? And then Paul begins to persecute the church, and there's a great persecution in Acts chapter 8 that breaks out against the Jerusalem church. And what do the apostles do? Do they run away? No, Acts chapter 8 says that they remain in Jerusalem. And then Acts chapter 3, Herod Agrippa kills James, the brother of John, and arrests Peter because it pleased the Jews, right? And so he kills one apostle, one of them gets martyred basically, and then he arrests Peter because the Jews are like, yeah, cool, do it some more. And so if I can make an argument that the book of Acts, like I could with the Gospels, is reflective of like the unembellished testimony of the witnesses, then that goes a long way into prove that they were willing to suffer. And there's other ways to prove that they were willing to suffer. And I can talk about some of those if you have questions on that. But that's basically kind of it in a nutshell. And so, that's not much of a nutshell. That's a big nutshell. But basically, yeah, we're going to just argue from the Gospels. Does it reflect unembellished testimony of the apostles? Yes, because of all these reasons for historical reliability. And then same with Acts. Were they really willing to suffer? Yes, because of all the amazing reasons that we can argue for the reliability of the book of Acts and that it actually goes back to witnesses. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And so does it require more details? Yes. But you can also get way further down the road with showing that these guys were actually rational and willing to suffer. And so they weren't lying. They weren't mistaken. That leaves the only one other option, in that they were actual witnesses of what they saw, right?
Yeah. Sounds good.
So, yeah, it's just, did they lie? No. Were they mistaken? No. They're telling the truth. So, simple kind of trilemma there. And so, do you have any follow-up question to that, or any other questions?
Not that I can bring to mind, but I guess I was wondering, do you have sort of a repository of where you keep all these notes, so that, let's say I'm in a case where I can't like watch a video, I can quickly just refer to the notes?
Oh man, yeah, that's a good question. I don't. I'm just now kind of getting better at collecting notes personally for myself in Logos, as you can kind of see here. And so I don't know how to share those kind of things. but I should find a way. I do make my slides available. If you go back and watch my live streams, and you're like, "Ooh, I like those slides," you're welcome to just email me at testifyapologetics at gmail.com, and I'd be happy to share the slides with you. And so yeah.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. I'll reach out via email. I guess okay,
Okay.
one last one before I leave.
Yeah, you're good.
YouTube is also something that I've also been considering. I come from Zambia, and I guess there's a need for apologetics, at least culturally here, as it would be different, of course, in the US, different objections, different things that are more important to other people. I guess what would be your advice? I mean, I have few videos, but what would be your advice just starting out? Any mistakes that maybe you made or you see young YouTubers, Christian YouTubers make? What would be your advice?
As far as young Christian YouTubers go, my advice would be, don't try to. There's a few things. Man, I mean, number one, man, this you touched a broad topic. Number one, and I'm assuming you have this down pat, is be a faithful member of your local church and be submitted to your pastor. I would say it's not a bad idea to let him know that this is what you want to do. It doesn't mean that he might invite you to like start a group in the church, but he might. And so if you could have an apologetics group within the church and just begin to train your people in the church, even if it's a small group and only like 5 or 6 people show up, that would still be pretty awesome. Okay. That would be a huge, awesome opportunity, right? As far as like starting things on YouTube, my advice would just be read tons and tons of books. Don't just watch like tons of videos and try to be somebody else, but just find out who you are, what arguments, what topics really appeal to you, and then focus on those topics. It's real easy to kind of watch other people and just kind of want to almost mimic to some extent of what they're doing. And I mean, some of that's okay, but it's better to just like almost like log off for a long time and read a bunch of books and get the at least the knowledge of where can I find the answers. You don't have to memorize all the answers, but where can I find the answers, and start making your own notes as well. And Logos Bible Software has awesome tools to help you do that, and it's definitely worth the cost of a subscription. And I'm not being sponsored to say this. Logos, reach out to me. If you want to pay me to say it, I'll say it. But anyways, I'm just kind of joking. But anyways, having tons of notes, having tons of preparation, knowing what to read. I do have a recommended reading list on every description of my videos. So being mentally prepared. And then also I would say being spiritually prepared, because you are going into the trenches, so to speak, and Satan doesn't like that. So just be prepared for him to try to stir things up and different kind of trials and tests. Maybe that's kind of overly practical, but it's true. Just be ready spiritually for an attack, because he doesn't want you to spread the gospel and the truth. And then the other thing I would say to just like young YouTubers is like, just don't get in the ditch of like clip farming and just trying to like dunk on. I've made this mistake, where you're like, I'm gonna just do this response video and just dunk on this guy and show him just why he's wrong. I think it's good to do like a respectful reply, and there's nothing wrong with responding to clips and different things like that. But don't just try to like, I'm gonna go after the biggest and best guy just because I'm gonna like farm his aura, so to speak, as the kids these days say. Like some people just do that to get a reputation. Unless God leads you to do stuff like that, don't go out of your way to do that. Just find people who can articulate the best version of the argument that you want to respond to. If you're going to respond to clips, and then respond to that. And so apologetics, you can kind of almost get dirty, because it can kind of turn into like conflict, like this constant, like us versus them. And I'm going to dunk on the dumb skeptic or the dumb Muslim guy all the time. And it becomes almost like, I don't know, too much of like a battle, like battle rapping or something. And I don't know, to me, that might be more entertaining for a lot of people, and you might pull in a bigger audience that way. But like, you are gonna, at least for me, if I don't do it right and it's real easy to slip into the flesh and do it wrong, my soul my conscience starts to bother me. So maybe those are just some practical things that I can think of off the top of my head there. And so that cover a wide variety of things, whether it's getting practical knowledge, or I mean, book knowledge, or just the way that you deal with people and how you talk to people.
Sounds good. I appreciate the advice. I like the part about talking about being a faithful member of a local church, something that's neglected, but it shouldn't be. So
Yeah.
I appreciate the call. I'm gonna log off now.
Yeah, no problem, man. Thanks, Kumba. Appreciate it.
All right.
Hey, thanks for being there since day one, man.
For sure. And I'll still be there.
All right.
See ya.
Praise God. Yeah. All right. Awesome. Yeah, this is cool. I like meeting you guys, and it's kind of cool to put faces to comments and different things like that. So awesome. Good questions all around. What were we talking about? Were we talking about the reliability of John earlier? I don't know. We'll see. Kind of look at. I'm gonna. Anybody in the queue who's already been up, I'm just kicking you. Not because I don't like you. Just watch on the live. That way I can keep. If the queue starts to fill up, you're not like clogging the line. So it's nothing personal whatsoever at all. People like Bart Ehrman really shook my faith. I started doubting, and that led me down to bad sin, brother. In desperate need of help. Oh man. Well, Tim, you shouldn't trust Bart Ehrman. That guy makes terrible arguments. If you have specifics of an argument, man, feel free to join, dude, if you can. Or say specifically in the chat what arguments from Bart Ehrman are really shaking your faith. Because I would love to. I love Bart Ehrman. I love picking on Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman is a fun guy to kind of debunk. And so yeah, let me know specifically if you have some examples of some Bart Ehrman contradictions, because I think Bart is probably one of the weaker critics of Christianity, to be honest. But I will also do this. Let me share my screen, because we got to plug this every time, because this is an awesome resource. If you would like to just talk privately with somebody, one-on-one for free, or we do 2-on-1, one-on-one Zoom calls, again, free with an expert. Me and Jonathan McClatchy, or maybe somebody else like Jonathan and Tim McGrew, or somebody will sit down and talk to you. Talkaboutdoubts.com. Go to it, fill it out. If you are a Christian who is struggling with doubts, or maybe you're a non-Christian seeker who has sincere questions, or maybe you've lost your faith and you want to see if you really left for the best reasons, we are happy to talk to you. And you can come and submit a question. You just put in your name, email, and basically when you're available and what your doubt is, and we will sit down and talk to you. I have done many calls going through the many goofball errors of Bart Ehrman in the past with some of the counselors here, and so we can do that. If you want to go through some specific examples of some goofy Bart stuff, I mean, we can. And so, for example, let me pull up my logos again here. Let's see. Stop. I don't know why it doesn't let me. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. But I have to kind of close my other screen to bring up logos again. Here's an example of some goofy stuff that Bart Ehrman says that people take too seriously. So, and I don't know if I have the exact quote in front of me. Maybe I can find it here. Probably should have the Bart quotes. I don't have Bart in my logos here. Let's see. Bear with me. I just gotta find it. Yeah, we can talk about why we don't need to let Bart bother us. All right. So Bart Ehrman says, and this is in Jesus Interrupted. And he says, it's page 50. He says, in Matthew, Jesus' disciples procured 2 animals for him, a donkey and a colt, and they spread their garments over 2 of them. And Jesus rode into town, straddling them both. it's an odd image, but Matthew made Jesus fulfill this prophecy of Scripture quite literally. Okay, like seriously, Bart, like is that really what Matthew is saying? Let's take a look. Let's just test out Bart. And so it says Matthew 21:7. It says they brought the donkey and the colt, and he put on them, so on them, their cloaks, and he sat on them. So what is the antecedent of them, right? Them most likely refers to the cloaks, not both animals, right? And so he's saying that like Jesus is doing a double donkey thing. He's doing some circus rodeo trick. Okay. But the disciples put cloaks on the animals. Jesus sat on the cloaks. Okay. And so it's kind of like, all right, so he's sitting on the cloaks. He's not sitting on straddling two different animals, right? Now it's also interesting that Mark 11:2 says that the colt, no one has ever sat on this colt, right? And so Luke 19:30 also says the same thing basically. So Matthew's mention of the mother donkey actually makes sense. An unridden colt he's going into a group of crowded people who are all shaking their palm branches and everything else like that and saying Hosanna or whatever. It'd probably be good to bring mom along to keep the unridden colt calm, and comforted, right? Now, what Ehrman says is that Matthew understood Zechariah 9:9, which talks about, it says, rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion, shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you, righteous and having salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, even the foal of a donkey, right? And so the point that Bart is going to say is like, he's just reading the parallelism and he's thinking like, okay, donkey, colt, and it's just a parallelism, but Matthew reads it super literalistically. And he's like, no, there's a colt and a donkey there. So I gotta fix Mark here and put this two animals in here. So Ehrman argues that like Matthew didn't really know the Hebrew well enough to do that, but that's not really true. Matthew shows full well he knows the Hebrew. For example, the Septuagint is going to say that Jesus took our sorrows and carried our griefs or something to that effect. When Matthew quotes it, he quotes it quite literally out of the Hebrew. He took our illnesses and bore our diseases, right? So he's reading the Hebrew, right? The LXX doesn't say it like that, right? And so, or actually the LXX, this doesn't match the Septuagint closely. And it doesn't even match the Aramaic Targum exactly. It seems like he's translating the Hebrew directly, right? He uses the Hebrew wording to connect Isaiah 53:4 with Jesus's many healings. And so for Jesus, what Bart is saying is like Matthew's a dummy, and he's not only dumb, he's also like ridiculous because he's going to like invent two animals. And like that's your objection to the Gospels right there is just one, for example. And so let's give another example of a goofy Bart Ehrman objection. Let me see. Actually, see Tavo has joined. I'm gonna let Tavo join. Good guy. Tavo, we'll get back to Bart. Well, let's take him a minute to connect here. I don't know. I don't think that's my internet. I hope it's not, because I have Starlink here, so it should be good. Tavo, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes,
great,
sir.
great.
Yeah.
I actually wanted to. Would you meet? I have just so you know, like I made a whole video about Bart Ehrman, so I think your points are great. So if you want to finish that point, I'm okay with, and I was gonna like load up some images to share with you that I think you might be interested in.
Yeah, that's fine. I finished that point with the whole double donkey thing. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so what I did is actually, I'm a university professor, and I've been an atheist for almost all my life, up until about a year ago or 2 years ago or so. And so what I did is I actually looked at 15 canonical texts, and of different religious traditions, and I looked at the Bible, and I looked at how many people are verified and how many locations are verified in the Bible versus other texts. It's actually a really striking difference. The Bible is way, way, way an outlier compared to every other religion. I have those images if you want me to show you those tables.
Yeah, if you want to share your screen, that's fine. I think it's just should be available for you.
Yeah, let me add the PowerPoint here. This is called the CTF argument. So what I do in this argument is I look at the witness traditions of each religion in the first 50 years. I look at the codicological speed, so how quickly the first codex was written. I look at the attestation of Christianity compared to other secular traditions. So I looked at like 32 different traditions between 10 CE and 60 CE. And I said that the time frame for Christian attestations of events is well within the time frame of attestations for other secular events that are not theological.
Okay. Yeah, man. As soon as I see it, I'll bring it up here.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm a long-time channel watcher. This is the first time I've engaged in a live chat, but channel's really great.
Oh, well, praise God, man. Yeah, I've seen your stuff and appreciate what you're doing. And so,
Oh, that's awesome. I didn't know that you were. That's super kind of you. Thanks. I
yeah,
didn't know
I
you.
think
So you were in my channel.
I've seen your channel, and I think you called in when I was on with Than. We were talking about resurrection.
Oh,
Stephen
okay, yeah.
on
Yeah.
Inspiring Philosophy. Yeah. So yeah, if you want to give us a little like a evidence sampler, go for it, man.
This is a video that's coming out tomorrow. So yeah. Oh, that's super kind of you. Sure. So this is a video that's coming out tomorrow. So this table looks at cross-traditional veneration. So basically, this shows that almost every other religion points towards Jesus, but Jesus points only towards himself. And if you kind of compare other figures and how they're venerated in other religious traditions, nobody has the numbers of Jesus. This is witness density. So this looks at witness traditions in the first 50 years of religions, just showing that, Christianity has the highest number of witnesses, even compared to like modern religions by some criteria. Christianity actually does better than. And then I look at witness speed, creedal speed. So how quickly does the first creed show up? Codicological speed. How quickly is the first codex written? And so Christianity actually does remarkably well for creedal speed, again, compared to even modern religions. And then attestation lags. This is kind of a fun one. I basically show that Christianity is actually the earliest and most robustly set of attestations compared to every other religious tradition. This is the best fit curve. So this is basically the time lag between when a theological event occurs and when it's written down. And for Christianity, you can see that the numbers are way earlier than any other religious tradition, and they're way more tightly compacted. The other religious tradition that's a real outlier compared to this curve is Judaism. But for this graph, I parsed out sort of Old Testament from New Testament.
Okay.
Yeah, again, here's Christianity, just average attestation lag rankings. Now here's the deviation from the best fit curve. So this just shows that Christianity has way earlier a deviation. And I did this data in a bunch of other ways, and basically the results are really robust. Okay, now here's what I'm talking about here. So if you look at verified individuals by Scripture, and these are absolute numbers, the Old Testament and the New Testament, if you combine them, you have a huge outlier compared to every other tradition, right? So verified individuals there's so many more of them, and then verified locations are also like way more in the old. Again, here I've parsed out the Old Testament from the New Testament kind of purposefully, and I know that the font is really small on some of these graphs, so I apologize for that. But this is for a video that I'm releasing tomorrow on the CTF argument, and I saw that you were live, so I thought, and
yeah, sure.
Yeah,
man. Well, guys, it's Tavo Senabri. Is it Tavo Senabri? Is that also the name of the channel? Yeah, it is. And so,
yeah, that's the channel.
Yeah. So check out his channel. There's unique stuff, good stuff. And I know like Apologia has kind of interacted back and forth with you a little bit. And so some people may have seen that. And so, yeah, definitely check out the channel. There's a lot of good stuff, but you're absolutely right. And when it comes to like the verification of places, and I've talked about this in previous streams where like, especially like Acts 13 through 28, all the different, like not just verified like locations, but like nitty gritty details, like even locations of synagogues, travel routes, titles of local officials, different things, like a lot of facts that are like a minefield for a fictionalizer to just easily trip on. And yet, like over and over, the author of Acts just shows himself to be like extremely well informed. And yeah, you're absolutely right. You don't see this you certainly don't see this in like the Quran. They don't like when did Jesus even preach? The Quran isn't going to tell you. It's going to have to be dependent on the Bible. And a lot of other different religions, like you don't see this, or even the apocryphal gospels. They don't have this level of like historical kind of confirmation. And so the Bible really puts itself out there as like this testable thing. And so yeah. So no, I appreciate the comment, man. Thanks for coming up.
Yeah, thanks. Just to quickly show you, here's the full scoring table. So I ranked 13 different religions with these 6 empirical things, and Christianity gets a perfect score across the board. It's the only religion that does that. And just one more thing that I'll show you super quickly.
Yeah.
These are 32 different events, and these are the Christian attestations right here, and these are the other attestations. So Christianity is well within the time frame of other attestations from 10 CE to 60 CE. These are all events that we know happened, that historians all agree that these happened. And these are all events that have no geological verification or physical evidence verification. They're only verified by our attestations. So, yeah, and I know sometimes I get into with atheists who say, well, you can't really take people or places as a surrogate for reliability of the theological narratives that are embedded in the gospel. The problem with that perspective is, I actually traced this out in some of my videos. Hoaxes actually do emerge, but they emerge centuries later. So for a theological work to say this is, embedded in actual factual events, in a factual time frame, the synchronisms, saying these are the people, and then deviate from that and say here's a theological narrative that's woven into that. For that to happen, that would the Gospels would have to be about 8 centuries ahead of their time, and you'd have to have 4 different writers who are all 8 centuries ahead of their time in what they're writing. So I saw you were talking about gospel reliability, and I was like, oh yeah, let me show these images. I'm really excited. This is a video that's coming up tomorrow. So
yeah. No, awesome, man. Tell you what, feel free sometime if you want to collab. Again, testifyapologetics@gmail.com. Yeah.
Oh, I would love that. That's so kind of you to offer.
Yeah. So feel free to reach out to me. Maybe we could do a stream or something together in the near future and go over stuff like this, or if you have something else in mind, just let me know and we could hash it out. But again, I appreciate what you do, and I think it's awesome, and I like your perspective, because you're coming at it from your own, like you've had a skeptical background, and you're looking at this stuff from a researcher and different things like that. And so yeah, it's awesome, man. I appreciate it.
No, thanks very much. Yeah. Keep your eye out for this video. And I'll shoot. It's testifyapologetics@gmail. I'll email you right after this. Okay. All right. Well,
Sounds
thanks.
good,
Yeah. Really great to see you. Thanks very much.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for joining.
All right. Likewise.
Yep. All right. Let's see. We'll get back to beating on Bart. We got another guest here. Jay.
Oh, what's up?
Oh, how's it going, man? Thought you were somebody else for a second.
Actually, this is my first being in a live stream.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no worries.
And I must apologize for my in advance because I'm not good at English from the Philippines.
Oh, that's okay. We'll do what we can.
Okay. So I have a question. This is a quick question. How in the book of Matthew, like the two thieves, like were hanging on the cross, like they were heap insults in Jesus, but in the other books, like John, the other thief was repenting. Like I'm having trouble understanding the 2 books. Like
Yeah,
are they
sure.
contradicting?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about there. And so let me try to remember what verse that is off the top of my head here. Um, I think it is Luke 23:46, maybe. Let me look here. Oh, 36. I don't know. I typed in something else. Yeah, it says here. Let me pull up my screen again. Oh, actually, I already have it. And it says 2 others were criminals, were led to be put away to death with him, and they came to the place called the Skull. There they crucified him, and the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And Jesus said, "Father, forgive them." And then, yeah, the guy is repentant. He says, "This day you'll be with me in paradise." I'm trying to remember. Let me see. Parallel account here. Yeah, that's
I
not it.
believe it
Was it Matthew's account?
Matthew, yeah, 27:44.
Matthew 37:44. 27:30. I've always just taken it as he could have started out that way and then just was like, wait a second, I'm wrong. And he just repented. I mean, I don't see what the problem is there.
Oh, see.
Yeah, I mean, I could see where he could just be bitter, and he's like, "Oh, here I am, I'm dying, I'm suffering. This guy claims to be such and such, and yet, like, what's the deal?" And then suddenly he's like, "Wait a second." As he's on the cross, and he is thinking about the situation, and he's thinking about who Jesus is, and he's seeing his behavior. He could just be like, just flip and reverse, right? And so I don't see really like a big deal why it can't necessarily be both. Matthew is not near the cross. Okay. He is, we don't know exactly where he's getting his information, but we know he fled. He could have been getting it from like one of the women. Luke, however, shows like women more close up to the cross, and when they are getting they might have had more information, and Luke just fills in the story a little bit more. And so I don't see it like as like a straight up contradiction. It just is like variation. And I just don't see why it could be both. I can't see why somebody sitting on the cross with somebody for a period of an hour and a half or something and just thinking to themselves, like, is this really the way I want to die? Reviling somebody who I can see now is honestly an innocent sufferer. And then he just has a change of heart. And so it's just kind of, now I could see somebody saying, well, this is kind of like forced harmonization, this, that, and the other. Well, it's really not. There's variation in testimony all the time, right? I just talked about this in my recent video. Now, I think the thing is that the Gospels, because they do show themselves to be corroborated in so many other ways, like Tava was just saying, while you're waiting, and some of the things that I was going over while you're waiting, the fact that they show themselves to be reliable in so many other ways. Well, like in history, we harmonize things, right? When a source shows itself to be a reliable source. If it was just like crazy contradictory all the time and just saying a bunch of goofy stuff, that would be a whole other thing. Like, we're not going to try to harmonize the Gospel of Peter with another apocryphal gospel. You know what I mean? We're not going to do that because there's reasons why we think those books are sketchy. But when we look at these books and we see lots of reasons to think, wow, this is actually chock full of like tons of real history stuff, then we do what we do with any other historical work that purports to be history. We do sensible harmonization. So does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Did you have any other question, or was that the only one?
Oh, that's the only one, because I'm still learning how to understand the Bible, like the whole thing from old to new, because here in the Philippines, people, like, I heard many people, like pastors or priests, preaching, like the way they preach, like they can give misunderstanding. That's what I see in the mass, and also what I saw in the videos. So yeah,
Okay.
that's why I want to understand from the other, like in your channel, I always watch you explain truly, like other apologetic I also watch.
Cool. Well, praise God, bro.
that understanding.
Well, I appreciate it. I feel like we got a bit of an international flavor today on the call-ins, and so yeah, thanks, Jay, for coming up. It's a good question. I appreciate it. And
Yeah, thank you also.
yeah, man.
God bless you.
Yep, take care. All right. Modern atheism. I see you back there. Give me 1 second. Let me move something here. Just making a note of something real quick. All right, bear with me, guys. I'm just making a quick note before I forget something. I know it's dead air is always bad, but I would rather not forget what I'm thinking about. All right. Boom. All right. Note finished. All right. Modern atheism, my brother. How's it going, sir?
Good, and you?
I'm doing all right.
Great. I was reading the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy of Miracles that was written by Tim McGrew.
Yeah.
And he was talking about a criteria that you have mentioned in your channel. I forget the name of the guy. It's one guy from the Middle Ages. You know what I'm talking about? It has this criteria is like available to the senses, public, and there is one criteria that is you need a tradition to come out of this miracle. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. It is. Let me see if I can pull it up.
I just read. I forget the name. I just had it earlier today.
Yeah.
The video is a bit frozen to me. I don't know if it's like that to everybody.
Is it?
Yeah, but now, okay, but now it's fine.
Am I moving? Okay, good.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember. I know what you're talking about. Let me just pull up my own blog because I'm sure I got a post here. It's Leslie's criteria, Charles Leslie. Yeah. And so basically it is just for people so they know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Leslie says that there's a religiously neutral test. We could basically look at an event, see if it's historical. It doesn't necessarily mean that if something like passes the test that it's definitely historical, but it is like an evidence. Like it's evidence for it. Leslie might be a little stronger than what Tim or I would say, but he says that the matter of fact such that men's senses, their eyes and ears may be judges of it. So that's the S, and that it may be done publicly on the face of the world. So P, that's public. We could just say spot. Okay. And that there are not only public monuments that are kept up in memory of it, but some outward actions perform. So outward actions would be the O. And then such monuments and such actions and observances are instituted and to commence from the time that the matter of fact was done. And an example, like he would say, in consideration of that criteria, Jesus's resurrection would pass the test because it was a public event. It was an object of men's senses. There were outward actions that were performed afterwards, like changing the day of worship of the week to Sunday, which was the day of the resurrection, from the Sabbath, as well as like baptism and communion. And that was something that was set up like immediately after the event. And what's the other one? Time. Yeah. So I already included that. These were things that didn't like get developed later. So
I have a little concern about the criteria of the requiring a tradition to come out of it, like or an action to remember this, because it feels to me a little a circle around it, because you have the Christian miracles have traditions around it, and you're going to say that your criteria is that a miracle requires a tradition around it. And so let me give you an analogy. Like a Mormon, imagine a Mormon has Joe Schmidt has 11 people witnessing the golden tablet. So imagine a Mormon says, okay, my criteria is that more than 10 people need to be witnesses, right? Something like that. It feels a little bit like you're just specifying your thing, but other miracles could have not that thing, but still be, perfectly fine, seems to me, I don't know.
Yeah. No, I get what you're saying. And so that's just one of the criterias. Like, okay, so Leslie's argument would be something that I would say would be like an argument in favor for. So basically, this is two different criterias, and this is gonna like, for those of you who don't know the Testify lore of all of this, there's one criteria that Tim McGrew talks about where we could weed out unpromising claims to a miracle. And then the criteria that I just talked about, Leslie's criteria, is a promising candidate for a miracle. So when Leslie is giving we'll just call it spot, okay? We'll just say that, right? The one that I just went over, I would say that's like a good place to start investigating. But it doesn't necessarily mean like if anything else passes that criteria, you could also look at it further and go, okay, does it pass? Like, is this interesting or not? Right. Now, the way that I weed stuff out of like these are unpromising candidates is I talk about the doubts filter. Right. This is something that Tim talked about in his debate with, I can't remember the name. It was Bible and Beer Consortium. It was one of the most lopsided debates I've ever seen. And Tim is not even really a debater, but anyways, he talks about the doubts criteria of weeding unpromising candidates out. And so that would be like distance. If the initial report of an event occurs at a great distance from the actual occurrence, skepticism is warranted. Opinions already established. When miracles align with pre-existing opinions and biases, caution is necessary. Uncertain and undetailed events. And so like if an event genuinely happened, it could be reasonably explained as a natural occurrence, and skepticism is justifiable. Excuse me. I'm reading off my own blog post here. And then also lack of detailed information about the supposed miracle would also raise doubts, right? B, belated reports that the first accounts of a miracle surfaced long after the event. And then trivial events, miracles unrelated to any significant purpose would be treated skeptically, and self-serving miracles. And in my videos, I've given examples of like why different religions kind of fall on this filter. And so these would be like unpromising candidates. And then if something passes the other four, then it's like, that's a promising candidate. But all that does is that just gives you a start. And so I guess I would have to say, if this is the Texas sharpshooter fallacy, I mean, these are religiously neutral criteria. So my question would be like, what would you add to these to rule out a miracle claim? I mean, because to me, these are just like very common sense kind of things. You know what I'm saying?
I think these make sense. I will not demand the one of it has to spawn a tradition, right? That's all I will say. You know what I mean? I don't think that's required. That's what I mean. These are fine.
I mean, if it's a tradition that people follow from the very beginning, I think what Leslie does is he gives examples of like things that like happened, like traditions that happened like long after the event. And so, and so like if I was to say, hey, today is Blurmsflurm Day, and we've been celebrating it ever since, okay, I know it's Cinco de Mayo, so that's probably bad. But say tomorrow is Blurmsflurm Day, and that's why the Gateway Arch was built in St. Louis. It was to commemorate the time that the ogres, crossed the river and conquered the I don't know, the trolls or something like that. You'd be like, what? You can't just like institute a whole like ritual and holiday like way after like just now. Like you can't do that because everybody would know from that period of time, like we've never celebrated this. I have no idea what you're talking about. This is completely obviously made up and ad hoc and pulled right out of your butt, so to speak. And so it's a lot harder to do that when like there's always been this tradition from the very beginning of the event of this is things that we do in order to commemorate such and such event. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess so. People in the chat earlier were talking about the debate between Alex O'Connell and Trent Horn. I don't know if you watched that. It was very interesting.
I haven't. I need to.
Oh.
I want to. It's on my watch later list. Jonathan and I might be doing a response to it at some point.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, well, then maybe you don't know because Alex O'Connell brought up a very interesting counterexample that is similar to the group appearances of Christians.
Okay.
It was the transfiguration. I don't know if you have heard about this. It was the transfiguration of Brigham Young, I think.
Brigham Young?
Allegedly he like transformed into Joe Schmidt in a very public way. And I was this. If you haven't looked into it, you may not know, but I started looking into it. And the impressive part is there was one Mormon historian who tried to gather, and there were hundreds of people present at that event, allegedly. And he tried to gather testimonies. She was able to gather like 120 or 130 testimonies, first-hand testimonies of people saying, yeah, we saw this Brian Young transform into Joe Schmidt. And it's like over
Joseph
100.
Smith, yeah. I mean, again, I get what you're saying there. I think that would fall on the O of opinions already established at that point, because they already see Brigham Young as like in the line of the prophets with Joseph Smith. They think he's his successor, basically. So there's an opinion already established there. I don't know the details of the testimony, so I'd have to look into that. But my immediate reaction is like, just like the criteria I just went over, it completely falls on the doubts criteria of opinions already established, right? And so it's just kind of like maybe I'm already disinclined and uninterested at the beginning because this guy is also Brigham Young by the Mormon Church has kind of been declared to teach some heresy when he said Adam was God. But anyways, so there's already a little bit of a problem there. But yeah, with the already established criteria, that already kind of cuts against that. And so I would be less inclined to do that, where the opinions were not already established that Jesus would be the resurrected Messiah ahead of the whole general resurrection himself. That opinion was not established. They thought he was, his own followers thought he was dead. They were grieving that he was gone. They did not believe. And so it wasn't an opinion that was already established. Maybe they had an opinion that he was a great person. And that's something.
The Messiah. They had an opinion that he was the Messiah.
Sure. Yeah, they did. But I don't think that that's going to automatically go, okay, well, now like we got to come up with some sort of cockamamie story in order to say that. I don't think that like it doesn't fall in the doubts filter of an opinion already established, because they didn't have a pre-existing opinion of a resurrected Messiah coming before as like the first fruits of the resurrection of the rest of the dead.
Yeah, or the thing, if you are specific enough, a Mormon can also say that they did not have an opinion of Brian Young transfiguring into Joseph Smith, like specifically, right? If you are too specific, of course, that didn't like.
But they already saw him as the successor. They already saw him as the successor to Joseph Smith.
Sure.
And so if they already see him as the successor, then that's like, okay, you know. Now again, I don't know the details of the testimony.
Yeah.
And so like if it's like interesting enough to like examine, then I would just have to examine it.
Yeah.
But I just don't see any reason why. Just at first blush, it's just like it just instantly fails on the criteria.
I looked into it, and it has a huge difference that the records of the time, there were records of the meeting at the time, and they didn't say anything impressive happening. Only like about 7 years or 10 years or more, then we see the stories appearing, right? And that's like a huge difference. Like, how could something happen and not people at the time notice? But I think I still thought it was impressive that a historian managed to get over 100 people saying firsthand that, yeah, we saw him something like special, right? There were many hundreds of people there, like something like Fatima or whatever, like a group gets a little too excited.
Well, Fatima is a little bit different because it has at least some sort of, I mean, I don't believe necessarily Fatima. Sorry, Catholic viewers. Just because I think it could have I think it could be reasonably explained as a natural occurrence. I know this is where people want to fight me. But that would fall on the U of the criteria as far as Fatima goes. As far as this thing with Brigham Young, like without details of like what the actual testimony was like, other than, you know, he went from looking like this to this, like under what conditions, how much light was present, how many witnesses were present, did they report, or does their testimony like, you know, is it similar? You know, it doesn't have to be like 1-for-1 match, but is it like pretty similar? And it's like, well, no, I don't think so. And so, but yeah, going back to what you said about the whole Texas sharpshooter thing, it's just like, hey man, if you're welcome to improve the criteria if you want to. If there are other things, I mean, what we don't want to say is like nothing could ever establish a miracle. We should have something that should at least say, hey, there's a good reason to at least look into this. Like if it's even possible that I'm wrong about atheism, and if there is a God who does want to reveal himself in some kind of way, he is going to have to do it by a miracle. And so like, what are things that we would not want to see in a miracle report, right? And admittedly, even with the doubts criteria, that's going to cut against like even some of the reports in the Bible. And I'm not saying that because it doesn't pass the criteria, it doesn't happen. I'm just saying that it makes it a very unpromising place to like start when you're trying to say like, this is what God did. But when the resurrection does at least pass that, and then there are other reasons to look at the resurrection, then you go, okay, well, at least at bare minimum, an atheist could at least admit, bare minimum, the resurrection is at least one promising place to start and look for a miracle, and even be honest and say maybe it's the only one. I don't know. I don't think that there is. I think there are modern cases, but I think modern cases require completely different criteria, because it's just like, well, we can actually test these people, so why not even get up closer and get even more information from doctors and different things like that? And I think there are plenty of those. In fact, Dan and Caleb Jackson are doing a stream, I think today or Thursday, on modern miracles, where they're doing call-ins. So maybe you can call into that too. So
yeah, that's cool. So okay, one last thing. You know, Jonathan McClatchy, if you talk to him, he actually agreed to come to, well, this guy Dale from Real Seekers, he said he agreed to come to my channel to talk about human arguments against miracles. I was very interested in discussing the philosophical justification of this. I think Jonathan McClatchy is very good at this. And Dale from Real Seekers told me that he agreed, that he was interested. But then I sent him an email, and I haven't gotten back anything from him.
Okay. Yeah. I regularly speak to Jonathan, so I could definitely reach out to him.
And you got my email?
I have, dude, this month and a half has been terrible, and so I'm sorry if I haven't responded. I'd consider it. I would definitely consider it. I don't know if they would be interested, but maybe if that platform,
big YouTubers, they get a lot of people. It gets them lots of viewers.
Sure.
Maybe they will be interested on me. Maybe they will say you're not good. They're too small for them.
I don't know. Maybe. So, but no, I have no problem with it. Obviously, I have no problem with you coming up and talking about this here. And so it's not like you're running. You see, this is the proof. But anyway, yeah. Let me get back to you and schedule it out. If we did do it, schedule it out at a time. Probably would be June at the earliest. And so, I don't know what modern day debate even has, but I don't really have a problem with it. So
okay, super. That sounds great. Thank you.
All right, man.
Yeah, thanks for coming up. Okay, see you.
Yep.
Bye.
All righty. Let's see. I'm always wondering. Let's see. We'll find out. All right. Lagging Leland.
Yes. Hello, Testify. Oh my gosh, I'm a really, really big fan. I can't believe I'm talking to you here. I've loved your videos, loved researching all this stuff, but there's been a question in the back of my mind for a little while recently, and it's, why is it that the resurrection accounts in the Gospels are so brief? And I say this not because I'm not some skeptic who thinks, oh, well, just because they're missing some details or just seeing one thing or the other, suddenly it discredits the whole gospel narrative. However, I have always wondered why one of the most important, I would say probably the most important thing that backs up our whole religion, our whole faith, is the resurrection accounts. And they are much briefer than the rest of the Gospels. And so it's very interesting to think of what is kind of missing, or what you would have liked to have heard a little more of concerning, like one thing I always thought of is like, oh, what was it like for Mary to see Jesus after the resurrection? We don't get to hear about that or any other story similar to it, and it's kind of interesting to me how brief they are. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, in some ways, I think that is an argument for the reliability in that they show like restraint. And so let me find something here real quick. Like, where does it say? Oh, let me switch chapters here.
Is it John and Jesus did more things than these, and you could not write it in
No,
all books of the world?
no, I got it here. It says in Luke here, I'll just pull up my screen here. Now in terms of restraint, yeah, I mean, I'll answer the question. It's going to be speculative, okay? Because we don't really know, right? And so we don't know why a historian is going to give so much time to a certain thing over others, for sure. Maybe they just really valued his teaching and wanted to make sure that we like got a lot of his teaching and life and ministry too. And so I think that would definitely be like some part of it. We obviously do have a lot of information about the appearances, as I went over with a previous caller, like what the nature of the appearances were like. And so, but one of the things that I think is actually, I mean, I would kind of say that this goes the other way, is that the gospels show incredible restraint. And so in Luke 24:34, it just says, "The Lord is risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." What? Okay. Like Simon, the guy who like just like completely denied that he knew Jesus. Simon, like main character guy besides Jesus in the gospels, like the one that he like says, "Hey, Peter, you know, flesh and blood hasn't revealed this to you, but my Father, you know, and like, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah." And that's all we get, right? Like, if you think they're going to make things up, like, why doesn't Luke like invent a whole scene or like a dialogue, right? Or then we have like just this one snippet about James. Then he appeared to James in 1 Corinthians 15:7. Like, that's Jesus's brother. Like, inquiring minds would like to know, you know?
Yeah.
And so, but like, there's no gospel that gives the story. So I feel like if the gospel writers really felt free to just like make stuff up, these would be super obvious places to do it. Peter and James ended up becoming like the major guys in the book of Acts, aside from Paul. And, you know, so something would have some kind of apologetic value, like something, you know, and yet they show so much restraint. And so it seems like they're only reporting what they seem to have source access to. And so Luke, we know he wasn't an apostle, right? He had the opportunity to talk to the apostles because he's traveling with Paul in the famous we passages. And one of those is when he gets in Jerusalem, and it says that James and all the elders were present, right? And so all the elders, this is constantly referred to as apostles throughout the book of Acts. And so he had access. He got information. He extracted testimony. That may be why we have the testimony of, like, say, Cleopas or somebody like that, a lesser known person, or certainly the women. We know that that Luke certainly knew something about the women followers. He talks about how they supported Jesus monetarily in Luke chapter 8, right?
Yeah.
And so he does get some information, but he's not a witness. And so, and then as far as John, I mean, the one that claims the loudest to be a witness, like he gives us a lot of stuff. I mean, you have Mary Magdalene basically hugging Jesus. You get
Peter denying the Peter being, I guess, redeemed the 3 times, right?
Yeah, Peter on the seashore. I mean, he's basically cooking fish and making breakfast for these guys. The appearance to Thomas, the appearance to the disciples, and all that other stuff. And then he does say, like, the whole purpose of the book is just that you believe. And so, I mean, yeah, we could always imagine more, but you also have to imagine too, these guys really wanted to include the teachings of Jesus. Scrolls were not cheap and they were not unlimited.
Yeah.
You know, and so like it was expensive to probably pay for scribes, pay for scrolls, make copies, and all of this other stuff. And so they're like, let's include the most important details. And they're, yeah, these guys are out there preaching. Maybe other people already had the details, you know, of other things, and they're just wanting, like, what are the most important things for people to know? And based on what we do have, we could say that these are not the kind of appearances that people could be honestly mistaken about, especially with Thomas, right? Especially with what we see in Luke 24, especially what we see in Matthew 28. where they touch his feet and different things like that. And so we could always imagine more evidence, just like I could imagine getting a bigger paycheck. But I think we have I think I have sufficient evidence. I'm being sufficiently paid for the job that I do. And so does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you. Testify. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem, man. Was that your question?
Yeah, that was my question. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Yeah, no problem, man.
Can I
Thanks
ask
so much.
another one, or do you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, you're good.
Cool.
You're good.
So there's I love reading apocryphal works, and now that I'm off of school for the summer, I've been reading a lot more, just because it's one of my favorite areas of study. And I was reading the Gospel of the Egyptians, or at least what we think we have of the Gospel of the Egyptians, which, as far as I know, is just quotes from saints that had quoted from them and had mentioned things about them, and that's all that we really have to go off of for them.
Yeah.
I believe that's the case with that. And I was also reading the Gospel of Thomas, and I noticed that there is a section of the Gospel of Thomas. I can actually pull up. I have I'll be right back. Let me go get my Apocrypha collection. Let me find the saying.
Yeah, you're fine.
So it's saying 22 of the Gospel of Thomas, and I know this is Gnostic, I know, but this is something I noticed. It was a little weird. So it says here, Jesus saw some little children nursing. He said to his disciples, actually, wait, no, that's not the part. Let me go to the next part. Jesus said to them, when you make the two into one and make the inner like the outer and the outer like the inner and the upper like the lower, and so make the male and the female a single one, so that the male won't be male nor the female female, when you make the eyes in the place of an eye, a hand in the place of a hand, a foot in the place of a foot, and an image in the place of an image, then you'll enter the kingdom. Now, obviously, this is some goofy Gnostic stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And as I saw, like, reading these is so funny because it's this Bible fan fiction. But reading, this is apart from, at least in my collection that I bought, this is included as a quote. I believe this was Clement that had written this, and it said here, when Salome inquired when things concerning which she asked should be known, the Lord said, when ye have trampled on the garment of shame, and when the two become one, and the male with the female is neither male nor female in the first place, then we have not this saying in the four Gospels that have been delivered to us, but in that according to the Egyptians. So this quote here from the Gospel of the Egyptians, or, again, it says there at the end of this little section, it says, we quoted from, this is a quote from the Gospel of the Egyptians, not found in our canonical form. And what's very interesting to me is that this is very, very similar to what appears in Thomas, and that immediately stuck out to me when I was reading the two.
Yeah, the thing is, I'm not going to have a good answer for you right now, because I do remember coming across this before, and there's a book. I mean, I can refer you to a book, where this is discussed at length by Charles E. Hill. It's called "Who Chose the Gospels," and he does quote some. Clement of Alexandria does quote every now and then some funky stuff. He does say that he quotes Matthew 757 times, Luke 402, John 331, even the Gospel of Mark 182. And he calculates the ratio and basically compared to the Gospel of the Egyptians, Gospel of the Hebrews, traditions of Matthias, or maybe Gospel of Thomas. He cites them like it's a ratio of like 120 to 1. And so I don't remember why he says like he quotes them. Like he's not really necessarily like approving of them. But I forget like how Hill parses it out exactly. Like I'm just drawing a little bit of a blank right now, and I apologize. So what this is going to force me to do, and I appreciate this, is now I'm going to have to go back and read that chapter again. And I'm going to go to that quote in Clement where I have in my Apostolic Fathers here in Logos here. And I'm going to make a note of what Hill says. But I just don't remember right off the top of my head right now. Maybe I'll even put a comment in this video later and a timestamp because it's just gonna bug me because I just don't like having the answer. But this is great.
I know that. Yeah.
Then it gives me like the incentive to like look it up. And so, but he goes through it. I know he gives this like explanation that Clement just quoted these sources at times, and like how he definitely favored the canonicals way more, like I said, 120 to 1. But I forget the exact line of thinking, and I don't want to misrepresent Clement or Hill there. So there you go.
Yeah. I was just very curious about it because it made
No,
me
that's a
really,
great question.
It made me really wonder because when I was reading Thomas, you see sections of Thomas that steal from the canonicals, and
You
so
definitely do.
it steals from the canonicals to form its book. And I
Yeah.
was kind of wondering if perhaps like this was a big like conundrum to me. I was like, okay, does that mean that Thomas stole from the Gospel of the Egyptians as well? Like, did he steal from other types of, apocryphal works, And
Yeah.
on top of that, does that mean that maybe because we know so little about the Gospel of the Egyptians, does that mean that maybe Thomas was being dubbed the Gospel of the Egyptians at one point? And because we don't have the full text of the Gospel of the Egyptians, perhaps that's what it actually was. I don't know. That was a very interesting thing that popped out.
Yeah. No, interesting thoughts for sure. I would say again, who chose the Gospels? Charles Hill. You could probably get it on Amazon Kindle for less than $20. It's a super good book, by the way, especially on authorship of the Gospels. And like the why we have the canonical four is probably my favorite book on the topic. And so I highly recommend people get it. But he does tackle that in a section, and I'll go back and check it out. But hey, man, maybe pick up the book if that intrigues you at all, because it's definitely a really helpful book on like authorship and canonicity kind of stuff.
I'm always in need of more reading material. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
No, and I really I look up to you quite a bit, and I love your videos. And I would say, like, if you recommend me a book, I know that it's a good book. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's definitely a good book. It's like I said, it's probably my favorite on the topic, and it's super accessible, but it's definitely scholarly enough where he's not just like giving you junk. Like there's tons of sources that he's pulling from there, and the arguments are solid, and he interacts with a lot of skeptical kind of authors. So that we're just like Irenaeus just kind of slapped some names on the four that he liked and called it good, and he really tackles that and just beats it down. So yeah, absolutely.
Can I ask you some more questions, or do you want me to like?
Oh, you're good. I got one other waiting in the queue, but you can ask me one more. That's
Okay.
totally fine. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just making sure because if somebody else is waiting on their question, they can have it. You know what I mean? I can like dip.
You're fine. You could do one more. That's fine.
What do you think of the Q gospel? Are you familiar with it?
Yeah, sure. So Q, I mean, it's just the shared material between Matthew and Luke. That's not in Mark, right? And so it's hypothetical. Obviously, there's no manuscript evidence of it. It's not mentioned in any of the early fathers. It's just shared material. And so I know like Mark Goodacre has basically kind of questioned it quite a bit. It used to be something that was consensus among historians almost, or at least, Jesus historians, and now people are like, well, yeah, I don't know. To me, again, it's just, I don't think much about it because it's just like, it's speculative. It's shared material. Whoop-de-doo. We know that. We have no access to it. So I don't have any strong opinions on it, honestly. Because it's just like, it's just kind of a hypothetical source. And so I know there's like some Muslims online that are trying to say, well, this is the real Injil.
Yeah, I've seen that before.
Which is completely mentally retarded because, I mean, I'm sorry, that's probably mean, but the way that Jesus refers to himself in the Q gospel, the things that he teaches in the Q gospel, he's drinking wine in the Q gospel. It's not a Muslim gospel, guys. Stop trying to make Q happen because it's never going to happen.
I was going to say, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, we don't have the Q gospel. We have like reconstructions of what it could have looked like, right?
Yeah, it's just sayings, right? And mostly just
Right.
sayings and share material. Yep.
So it's like because I've seen I've seen that some Muslims are like, well, this is the Injil, this is the original uncorrupted gospel, and it's kind of like, okay, even if we were to take the scholarly recreation of what this would have been like, it still doesn't agree with your beliefs.
No.
That's very
No.
funny to me.
Yeah, it's just because they're desperate to have any kind of semblance of credibility. And so Q is like, well, scholars mention Q, and Q is less Christian sounding than the four, but it's still way too Christian to be the four. So, I mean, it's still way too Christian to fit with Islam. So it's a ridiculous, pathetic attempt to, rescue their fake religion and their fake prophet. So,
Awesome.
yep.
Thank you so much, Testify. I appreciate everything.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for coming up, man.
All right. I'll see you later.
Right. Yep.
Bye.
Take care. All right. We got Erasmus.
Hi, brother. How are you?
I'm all right. What's going on?
Yeah, I'm doing well. I have a question about gospel contradiction. Maybe you can help me solve it. In Matthew 23:35, Jesus says that the Jews killed Zechariah, the son of Berechiah. But when we go to the historical book of 2 Chronicles 24:19-22, it says Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada.
Yeah.
But then,
go ahead.
Yeah. But then we have another Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, in the prophet, Zechariah 1:1-1:7. So was Jesus wrong about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that one, and I should have a note on that one by now. I'm kind of disappointed that I don't. Let me look something up real quick here. You said it was, yeah. Okay. Basically, yeah. Let me pull up the verse real quick. All right. Okay, I had the wrong chapter.
23:35.
Yeah. I'm going to give you the quick answer off the top of my head. I need to look into this one a little bit more because I need a little refresher on it. I know what you're talking about because it says basically Jesus said to the scribes and Pharisees that all the guilt, like you said, we're going to come on them concerning Zechariah. He was killed between the sanctuary and the altar. Some conclude that Zechariah, referred to by Christ, is the son of Jehoiada, which is mentioned in 2 Chronicles 24:20-22. And so the Zechariah referred to has to be the son of Berechiah. The Zechariah is one of the minor prophets, and his father is listed as Bechariah in Zechariah 1:1. He would be the most likely candidate because the other Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada, died around 800 BC. This is an answer I'm getting off of a source, by the way. I need to look into this more. If one thinks Christ referred to this Zechariah, then the span from Abel to this Zechariah would not cover the Old Testament period, which extended 400 BC to Abel to Zechariah, the son of Bechariah, which would make a better sweep of the Old Testament period. That would be the period of Abel to Zechariah and Jehoiada. Since many Zechariahs are mentioned in the Old Testament, it would be not difficult to imagine two Zechariahs dying from similar circumstances. So they're saying it's a different Zechariah. I would need more details and to look at this one, to be honest with you. I know Michael Jones did a video on this, and I don't remember like my initial response to the video, if it was like something that I really agreed with at the moment. And so I feel bad because I'm like, shoot, I don't remember this. I've made so many notes over the past few days just to be better prepared for these streams. And so, but stuff like this helps me because then I'm like, okay, well, this is one that I have a deficiency on. The last time this happened and I got stumped on a stream because I just couldn't remember the answer, I just made a video. So I might do that with this here because I've heard this one before. I know it's a fairly common one. But I haven't really researched it enough to have an answer to where I feel like I'm going to give you an answer that I'm like, boom, this works. But I'll tell you what I will do is I'll put this in the queue of videos. And when it pops up, man, leave me a comment and be like, hey, that helped. Or, hey, that stunk. That wasn't the answer I was looking for, but definitely do mention it to me because I'm sure the answer is simple and it's just escaping me and the stream is reaching the 2-hour mark and my head is just getting slightly fuzzy. But Yeah.
Can I ask just two quick questions?
Yeah, sure.
So I'm beginning to get into apologetics regarding the resurrection. So
Yeah.
what's your best advice? What should I study first, and then how should I go about with the maximal data case?
Just learn the case for just learn the case for the reliability of the Gospels. That's the biggest thing that you could do.
Okay.
And so because now you just have to make the careful distinction. Just because we're saying that the Gospels are reliable, we're not saying therefore the resurrection happened. What we're saying is that the Gospels are written by people who are honest, and are close up to the facts and knowledgeable. And so therefore what they are writing down are actually the claims of the witnesses. So if you can defend the authors of the Gospels as being like truthful, scrupulous, knowledgeable people, then you can say, okay, well, great. Now let's look at what they actually claimed. They claimed there's details in the Gospels of Jesus's resurrection appearances that are multisensory, that are not the product of like just being easily mistaken, right? And then how do they make these claims? They made these claims to a hostile audience that they just crucify the rabbi. They blame him basically for his judicial murder, and then they get arrested and beaten, and that's defending the reliability of Acts, right? And so if you can just defend the reliability of the Gospels and Acts, then you could say the content of their claims is something that they wouldn't be mistaken about, and the context of their claims is not something that they would lie about. Therefore, the best explanation is Jesus rose from the dead. It's super simple. Like giving the argument for the resurrection itself is really easy, but giving an argument for the reliability of the Gospels, well, that takes a little bit more. But really, if you could just give the positive evidence, if you could just learn like the undesigned coincidences and the external confirmations, you could just make a positive case. And when somebody comes to you like with a contradiction like you're bringing to me now and saying, well, what about this contradiction? You could just say, well, yeah, we could go back to that. We could bracket those. But we see contradictions in historical narratives all the time. That's not a big deal. None of the contradictions are the kind that show us that they're not trying to give us, honest information as best as they know it. And most of them can be easily resolved. And so, does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Have you heard about Sean McDowell?
Sean McDowell, yeah.
Yeah, Sean McDowell. So he has a book called The Fate of the Apostles, and in that book he argues that only 4 apostles' martyrdom, their martyrdom cases are strong. Maybe it was Peter, Paul, and James of Acts 12. So what do you think about that? Shouldn't we use that martyrdom of the apostles as proof of the resurrection, since he claims that these are not very robust historical accounts?
Yeah. No, I think Sean is right in what he's saying there. And but that doesn't take away from the argument, right? Because the argument should not be like they died. They all died these horrible deaths. Therefore, they really believed it. Okay. We can make a much more modest argument than that. And this is something that William Paley brings out in his book, In the View of the Evidence of Christianity, is he says that the apostles were willing to undergo labors, dangers, sufferings, and in some case, martyrdoms, right? And because that's a much more modest claim, and like, yeah, sure, people don't die for a lie, but they also don't undergo serious labors and sufferings and danger for what they know to be a lie too. And so if we could make a much more modest claim, and again, if you could defend the reliability of Acts, you have Peter and John arrested, you have the apostles arrested, threatened, and beaten. You have the stoning of Stephen, which would have served again as a warning shot to the people preaching in Jerusalem, and a great persecution breaking out against the Jerusalem church. You have the apostles still remaining in Jerusalem. That shows that they were pretty sincere about what they said. And then not only that, but you do have Acts recording Agrippa killing James, the brother of John, and then arresting Peter because it pleased the Jews. I do think Sean's right about the strong martyrdom cases that we do have, which would be Peter, and it would be certainly Paul. And so I forget. Oh, and then James, and then the other James. I think the strong case can be made for those. But I think you already have strong evidence just from the New Testament that there was this context of persecution. For example, let me just give you one example. Like, let me pull up my. Do I have my logos up? Yeah. There's a general context of persecution in Paul's letters, right? It says, "We ourselves boast about you and the churches of God for your steadfastness and faith in all your persecutions and afflictions and enduring," right? So in Thessalonica, they're being persecuted. Paul talks about people in Corinth. "We are afflicted in every way. We are crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed," right? And so Corinth, apparently, he describes himself as being persecuted. And he's talking about kind of as a group, like even people in Corinth are being persecuted, right? Romans 5:3-4 it talks about rejoicing in sufferings. Okay, so there's a context of persecution in Rome. You have Philippians, right? He's writing to them, and it says, "It's been granted for your sake that you should not only believe in him, but should also suffer for his sake." Okay, so there's this persecution in the early Christian letters. You have Hebrews, where it talks about recall the former days when you, after you were enlightened, you endured a harsh struggle with suffering, and sometimes being publicly exposed to reproach and affliction, sometimes being partners with those treated. For you had compassion on those in prison, So there's people being thrown into prison, right? And then it talks about in James, it talks about considering the suffering of Job, right? And how he was steadfast. And it talks about, he was an example of suffering and patience. So you see that in James's letters, you see it in Peter's letters, right? Don't be surprised at the fiery trial that comes to test you. So these letters are being written to people in Macedonia, Greece, Achaia, Rome, Jewish Christian audiences, Asia Minor. It's pretty widespread. And William Paley remarks, "What could all these texts mean if there was nothing in the circumstances of the times which required patience, which called for the exercise of constancy and resolution? Or will it be pretended that these exhortations, which, let it be observed, come not from one author, but from many, were put in merely to induce a belief in after ages that the Christians were exposed to dangers in which they were not exposed to, or underwent sufferings which they did not undergo?" And so there's also Jesus's predictions of his own disciples, the 12, being persecuted, right? And so you have him on the Olivet Discourse in Matthew. It says that they'll be delivered up for tribulation. To tribulation, they'll be killed and hated by all nations for his namesake. Mark says the same things. They're going to deliver you over to councils. You'll be beaten in synagogues. You'll stand before governors and kings for my sake. He's talking to his apostles there. We see the same thing in Luke chapter 21, where it says basically the exact same thing. They'll be delivered into prisons and all these other things. And then in John 15, he says the same thing as he's going to depart. He says, "Hey, the world hated me, and it's going to hate you too," right? And it says in 16:2 that they're going to be put out of the synagogues. They're going to be kicked out. People who kill you think they're going to think that they're offering a service to God. Again, he's addressing the 12 here. And so what Paley is saying, what Paley argues here, he says that he goes, "I'm not entitled to argue from these passages that Christ actually did foretell these events, or that they accordingly came to pass, because that would be at once to assume the truth of the religion." But he makes a more modest point. He says, "I am entitled to contend that one side or the other of the following disjunction is true." Now, here's the argument. Either that the evangelists have delivered what Christ really spoke, and that the event corresponded with the prediction, or they put the prediction in Christ's mouth, because at the time of the writing of the history, the event turned out to be. Or he says, like, the other option would be that, like, Christ said these things, but they never actually happened. Well, that would be kind of goofy. Or Christ never said these things and they never did happen, which also makes zero sense. And so either Jesus really predicted his persecution and the events matched, or the evangelist placed these sayings on Jesus' lips because the persecution had really happened. Either way, these sayings imply that real persecution happened within the world of the gospel writers, and it happened to the apostles, because again, in every single case here, all these verses I brought up, he's referring to the 12. Moreover, one more thing real quick here. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 4:9-13, it says, "For I think that God has exhibited us apostles last of all, like men sentenced to death. We've become a spectacle to the world." And so Paul says the apostles, and keep in mind that Paul's audience in Corinth knew about Peter. They knew about other apostles, right? They knew about the 12. And he says that they were hungry, thirsty, poorly dressed, beaten, homeless, reviled, persecuted, slandered, treated as the scum of the world. This is very early testimony around the early mid-50s that Paul is lumping all the apostles as this group of being persecuted, right? So does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes,
So,
it does.
yeah. And then one other thing real quick while I'm just on this. Polycarp, who was a student of John, according to Irenaeus, he says that Paul and the rest of the apostles suffered with Christ and didn't love this present world. And so right here it says Paul himself and the rest of the apostles, right? And he talks about these people being martyred, right? It says that they are in their due place in the presence of the Lord, with whom they also suffered. And so like he talks about all the apostles being willing to suffer. And Irenaeus, or excuse me, not Irenaeus, was that it? Was it just Polycarp? No, Clement of Rome, excuse me. He also talks about all the apostles being persecuted. He says, and this is in his letter to, this is First Clement. This is Clement of Rome, right? This is written around 95 AD. It says, owing to envy, Paul also obtained the reward of patient endurance after being 7 times thrown into captivity, yada, yada, yada. And it talks about, then he was removed from the world. Oh, I don't think I have the right reference. There's another reference here where I believe he says that all the apostles were in the same situation. And so, well, he talks about Paul and Peter here. I guess I misquoted a little bit. But anyways, Polycarp says it's all of them. Clement says it's Peter and Paul. So we have early witness. It's just not like, do we have reports of all of their death in extensive detail? No, we don't. But we certainly see from the book of Acts what they were willing to risk. And then we see the persecutions, the general context of persecution in the New Testament. And then, of course, we see that Paul in the book of Acts was just chased from town to town, right? Like, why think he had it any easier than the rest of the apostles? You know what I'm saying? There was already persecution going on in Jerusalem. So we have ample evidence that they are sincere witnesses. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Absolutely.
Okay. So awesome. I'm gonna update this link. All right. Was that your question?
Yeah. Can I ask one more last question?
Sure. That's fine.
Do you hold to PSA?
I don't. I just care about the biblical data. I think Isaiah 53 certainly teaches something like the PSA, and for some reason, yeah. So, but that's
question
kind of
was about.
Go ahead.
My question was about Isaiah 53, 10-12. That did the Father pour out His wrath on the Son? That was my question.
I mean, it certainly seems to describe that. And so, but Jesus willingly accepted it, right? He kept talking about the cup. Shouldn't I accept this cup? Let this cup pass from me. I think that's the cup that he's referring to, is basically drinking the cup of judgment that was supposed to fall upon us. It's going to fall upon him. And it says that it was the will of the Lord to crush him. He's put him to grief when he makes his soul an offering for guilt. So it's a guilt offering. But then he will see his offspring. He shall prolong his days. I believe that talks about the resurrection. And he's talking about like a spiritual offspring in Isaiah. Some people say, oh, no, that can only be physical offspring. But Jesus, or Isaiah himself, uses offspring in a loose spiritual sense throughout Isaiah. And the will of the Lord will prosper in his hands. Out of the anguish of his soul, he will see and be satisfied. By the knowledge of the righteous one, my servant will make many accounted righteous. He'll bear their iniquities. Because he poured out his soul to death, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I mean, I think Isaiah does teach something like the PSA. How people parse it out philosophically and all that other stuff, I'm going to let that to the theologians fight it out. But something like the PSA has to be true. But I think there's multiple aspects of the atonement that are true. I think there's aspects of Christus Victor that are talked about all throughout the Pauline letters too. So. Does that make sense?
I'm good. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you for answering my questions.
Yeah, no problem, man. Thanks for coming up.
Okay, man. God bless you.
Yeah, you too. All right. We will take one more, and then I got to get ready for work. Tim.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Hello. Yeah, I was the guy in the chat that had doubts and the bathroom and stuff. And
Oh, you're the guy. Yeah, no
yeah,
problem, man. No
yeah.
problem. I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
No,
Yeah.
yeah. Sorry.
So, because I have a limited amount of time, I was already kind of going through some bad Bart. Let me show you some more bad Bart real quick.
Yep.
Okay, so let me see. This is why I just Bart just doesn't scare me. Like, wish I still had that. I don't have the exact quote in front of me right now, but Bart, if I've heard him say it, you've probably seen him say it. He's definitely said it on podcasts. I have a whole playlist, so maybe that's something that can help you just offline. I have a whole playlist basically called "Busting Bart Ehrman's Bible Contradictions." Okay, so you can watch that. But I'll show you one like really shoddy example. I already talked about double donkey with you, like just over the chat. But here's another one that he says. He basically says, as the Gospels get later, he says Pilate becomes more and more innocent, right? And like Rome is kind of like made out to look better. And then the Jews, they're the bad guys, right? And so, and of course, the supposed order of when the Gospels were written is Mark came first, according to Bart. And then you have Matthew, and then you have Luke, and then you have John, right? And so he says that there's like kind of like an anti-Semitic trajectory that these Gospels move. And like it gets uglier and uglier for the Jews in the latest Gospels. And in the earliest Gospel, it's like, the Jews don't look so bad. They're not really the bad guys so much. It's like, and so that's basically Bart's argument. I'm not making this up. He said it on podcast. He said it in Jesus Interrupted. I just don't have the exact quote in front of me. I should probably put it in this note. So note to self, I will do that. But anyways, it says that theory just doesn't work. It's cherry picked and it's gerrymandered big time. Okay. Mark includes the plot of the chief priests and scribes to kill Jesus. Okay, so there's some Jewish people already pressuring Pilate, right? Mark includes Judas being bribed by the chief priests. Well, I mean, that's some Jews stirring up trouble, right? Like Mark says the arresting party came from the chief priests, scribes, and elders. Mark has Jesus tried before the high priest and the council. Again, Jews. Mark says the Jewish leaders delivered Jesus to Pilate. Well, that doesn't look so good on the Jews. Mark says that Pilate knew they handed Jesus over because of envy. That doesn't look so good on the Jews. Pilate pushes back. Why? What evil he has done, right? So if Pilate's supposed to look more and more innocent in the later Gospels and John, why in Mark does he go, why? What evil has he done? He's like, you're twisting my arm, basically, guys. Like, what is the problem here? Okay. So Mark doesn't portray Pilate and the Jewish leaders just simply agreeing, or Pilate like super, super reluctant and like the Jewish leaders like super, super bad. It just looks bad from the beginning. So that's the earliest gospel. And then you have this dandy of a passage in Matthew 27:24, which unfortunately like people have used to justify anti-Semitism. But it basically talks about Pilate washing his hands. And then it says, the crowd says, his blood be on us and on our children. Okay, so if John is supposed to be the most anti-Semitic, supposedly, of the Gospels, Matthew's the second Gospel on Bart's dating scheme, right? And this is like the most anti-Jewish looking statement in any of the four Gospels. Luke and John, they don't even include this line. So Matthew disrupts this whole line of progression, right? And so Luke isn't more anti-Jewish than Matthew because Luke omits the hand washing scene and the his blood be upon us scene. Luke also says he has a great multitude of women and people mourning as Jesus is being led away. Like they're crying, right? And they're upset. They're not happy about this. There's Jewish people literally weeping. And so that's not more like progressively like more pro-Roman and more anti-Jewish. Like that doesn't work, right? And then John is definitely not more pro-Roman. He has Pilate repeatedly say he doesn't find any guilt in Jesus, but that doesn't make him innocent. It only makes him more guilty because he knowingly condemns a man who he says is innocent. John also lacks the this Roman centurion's favorable confession. That surely there's no fault in this man. Surely this man is the Son of God. That we see in the synoptics. I'm putting it on the screen here. It says in Luke's version, it says certainly this man was innocent, right? And so John doesn't include every anti-Jewish element in there. Mark has mockery from the Jewish passerby and the chief priests. John doesn't include that mockery. John also admits Matthew's his blood be on us line. John is not simply later a more anti-Jewish expansion. And so it's just it's a goofy theory that just doesn't work at all. And then he does that again. Let me show you another way that he does that. And I know this isn't necessarily like a contradiction. I'm just saying this is an argument that Bart brings up. In Jesus Interrupted, he says that and I'm paraphrasing Bart, but again, trust me, and I have videos on this. I have evidence of Bart saying this stuff. He says that in Matthew or Mark's gospel, Jesus is confused. He's on the cross and he doesn't know why he's dying. But in Luke's gospel, he basically says Jesus is like a Vulcan and he's super cool and he's super chill and like he's okay with the dying stuff. And it's like two different versions of Jesus, right? And so it's like, well, like okay, does Mark really portray Jesus as confused about his death? Yeah, Ehrman's claim, the exact quote is he's in agony and sure the reason he must die, but he's completely calm in control. So this is again a development, right? Mark is confused. God has abandoned Jesus. Mark has a confused, abandoned version of Jesus. Well, Luke kind of smooths this out, right? But Mark shows that Jesus knows what's coming. He's not confused about why he's got to die. It says here, Mark 8:31, he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed. Okay, he says it again. The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men and they will kill him. When he's killed, after 3 days, he will rise. Okay, and then he says in Mark 10:32, he says, see, we are going up to Jerusalem. The Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and scribes. They will condemn him to death. They will deliver him to the Gentiles. They will mock him and spit on him and flog him and kill him. After 3 days, he will rise. He also says that he's going to give his life as a ransom for many in Mark 10:45. He also talks about the parable of the tenants where like the father sends all these like emissaries to these tenants and they kill him. And then finally he's like, surely they'll respect my son. And it says that they killed the son because they want to take the inheritance for themselves. So how in the world, Bart, like how in the world does this make sense? Just because he has Jesus crying, my God, why have you forsaken me on the cross? Doesn't mean anything because Jesus, he's not confused about why he's dying. He's quoting Psalm 21 or Psalm 22. I mean, and it says even in the Mishnah where it talks about when somebody quotes the Psalm, and I need to include that in my notes here, that they're invoking the whole Psalm upon himself. Well, Psalm 22 begins in suffering, but what does it end in? It ends in somebody being scorned as a worm and not a man, being despised by the people, and being laid down into the dust of death. And then, but what happens? Yeah, like his hands being pierced, people dividing his garments, and all this other stuff, being laid down to death, basically. But then, how does the psalm end? All the ends of the earth shall remember and turn to the Lord, and the families of nations shall worship before you. So Jesus is invoking this psalm, is saying this is what's going to happen. I may look forsaken right now, but and look at the rest of the psalm. This is talking about a suffering innocent person who is going to be delivered from death and is going to cause worldwide praise of the God of Israel. And I mean, Jesus is the only person that fits that prediction, right? And so Mark contains strong predictions of the death of the resurrection. Just to sum up, Mark contains a theological interpretation of Jesus' death as a ransom. It contains a bold claim before the high priest that like, hey, you're going to kill me, but I'm going to be the Son of Man who's coming in the clouds to judge you later. And so he knows his death is coming. And then John's gospel contains the most human of the sayings of all. When Jesus is on the cross, he says, I thirst. Like if this is the development pattern and John is the latest gospel, and here Jesus is like, man, I'm thirsty. You know, this is terrible. The pattern is not early confused Jesus to later super in control divine Jesus. And so Ehrman's contrast, again, is cherry picked. It's totally overstated. He does this all the time. He's a master at this. But if you just like read the text for yourself and like use a little thinking, he's not that scary. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Just one question.
Yeah.
Like what invoked this basically was like I think I watched a video on this, but like the contradiction, like with the birth story, for example.
Okay.
The supposed contradiction, like they went to Egypt, but they went to like all this stuff.
Oh, sure. Like just that Luke doesn't mention it, or
Like the argument of silence and all of this.
yeah. I mean, that would be like an argument from silence. And so, what the objection that Bart and I've certainly seen Alex O'Connor make this objection, is that Matthew seems to have the family remain in Bethlehem. They receive the Magi, they flee from Egypt, only later to settle in Nazareth. And so, which there's actually good positive evidence for that. But anyways, but Luke 2:39 says, I'm just checking the time real quick, that after the temple requirements were completed, they returned to Nazareth, right? And that's it, like no flight to Egypt. And so there's no room for the Magi. There's no Herod's massacre. There's none of that. And so, I mean, I think Luke is probably compressing a timeline here, because like he summarizes Jesus' childhood in one verse in chapter 2, verses 40. In Luke chapter 2, verses 42, it jumps to Jesus' age being 12. So like boom, okay. Like that's a lot. That's like a time warp that's happening there. And then Luke 24, 50 through 53, it looks like the ascension happens right after the resurrection on the same day. But in Acts 1:3, it talks about he was appearing to the disciples for over 40 days, giving them like convincing proofs. And so it sounds to me more like Luke is just kind of summarizing real quick because he's got to end his gospel, but he's going to write a sequel and he's going to fill in some more. Between Acts chapter 12 and Acts 13, Luke skips several years quickly. So this is kind of like a normal thing, like for Luke. And so to me, I think the temple presentation happened about 40 days after his birth. Matthew's Magi visit may have happened later, since they find Jesus in the house, not at a manger, right? And so that's not the same place. Herod kills boys 2 and under based on the time he learned of the Magi. And then Matthew narrates the event of the flight to Egypt, and Luke just simply skips. Now, let's just say worst case scenario, that Bart is right, and this is a contradiction. Is it a dishonest contradiction? I don't think that it is. I mean, at worst, this would be like a strike on inerrancy, but we're not talking about theological stuff right now. We're talking about just history. Bart is saying this didn't happen because they contradict. Like they couldn't. They both have to be wrong about this because of the contradiction. But what if Mary just recounted the temple events about Simeon and Anna, and then just like for whatever reason, when talking to Luke, she just jumped ahead in her story and said later, when we were living in Nazareth, we used to come every year to Egypt. Luke could have simply assumed that they returned to Nazareth right after the dedication and wrote accordingly. So even if we were to say, yeah, sure, Alex O'Connor, yeah, sure, Bart Ehrman, maybe this truly is an error, it's minor, it's chronological. It's not like they're deliberately changing stuff and making stuff up just to invent a story to like wow you about how cool Jesus is. This would just be a good faith mistake on Luke's part, that maybe he just misunderstood the sequence, but it doesn't matter. The core story is still there. So at best, this would just cause us, if this is a contradiction, it would just cause us to rethink inerrancy, but it would not cause us to doubt the substantial reliability of the accounts. It just doesn't do that. And so like, we don't throw out historical sources because of minor good faith errors. Mm-hmm. You have to provide evidence that they're literally like changing things and making things up and all this other stuff, but they're not. And in fact, we do have, and I'll show you this real quick here. We do have positive evidence for the massacre of the innocents. And so check this out. So in Matthew 2:22, it says, this is, they're returning home now to Nazareth, right? Herod had died. They're coming back from Egypt. And it said, but when Joseph had heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea, in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go back there. Being warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee. So what that raises a question, like, why is Joseph scared of Archelaus? What does this news bother him so much for? Okay. And so Matthew doesn't explain at all, right? But what we find out is from Josephus in Antiquities that basically after Herod's death, his territory was divided among his sons. Archelaus received Judea, Samaria, and Idumea. And where is Bethlehem? It's in Judea, right? Antipas got Galilee and Perea. Philip received territories north and east of the Jordan. And so this is something that we just know from history, right? So Archelaus, we just know, is in the place where they would have been going home to. But why is Archelaus scary? Okay. And so basically, Josephus tells us, right? There was basically, after Herod's death, there was these guys, Judas and Matthias, who led to the removal of Herod's golden eagle from the temple. There was these Roman shields that was put in the temple, and the Jews were like, that's idolatry. And that's worse than idolatry. It's in the temple. Get these images out of here. So I won't read all the references here because it's a bit lengthy and I have to get ready to go to work. But basically, these guys led the removal, the letter removal. These Jews were like, we don't like this. Okay. Herod responded brutally. He executed the offenders, right? He had Matthias, he deprived Matthias of the high priesthood and burnt the other Matthias who raised the sedition with his companions alive. So he burned these guys alive. He was not playing. This is like one of Herod's last moves, right? Okay. After Herod died, the next year when Archelaus took over, the people were mourning still over those that were killed over the golden eagle incident. They still remembered this, and they petitioned Archelaus. And like Archelaus was just basically ignoring it. And then, so what happened is now it's Passover time, and people are still talking about this, and they're upset about it. And some Roman soldiers were stoned. It says here that basically, yeah, you can see kind of the references here. It said that they made an assault upon the soldiers. They came to them. They stoned a greatest part of them. And although some of them ran away wounded and their captain among them, when they had this done, they returned to the sacrifices that were in their hands. So basically, they ran with they stoned these guys, picked up their sacrifices, and ran in the temple and were like, we're on base. You can't hurt us now, right? So Archelaus, he gets wind of this, and he's like, no, there's a new sheriff in town here. I'm not putting up with this. He sends his whole army, including horsemen. He surrounds the temple. He makes orders, kill everybody inside, and don't let anybody else come in. And you know what he did? After that, he canceled Passover. 3,000 Jews were murdered that day. Okay, so think about it. There's Jews coming back to like Alexandria, different areas. They're coming back from Passover, and they're traveling. They're going home, and they hear Archelaus is in charge now, and he murdered 3,000 Jews. Now you're Joseph. You're like, well, I'm going back there. I already escaped from one homicidal maniac. I'm certainly not going to go back to another one. But all of this fits. But notice Matthew, he doesn't fill us into any of these details, right? But it makes complete sense, right? And so, like, this is historical, like, verisimilitude in the account that just fits together. And so, as you can see, I could get a little geeked about this. Now, people will say, Herod never killed the children. We don't have any record in Josephus about this and all this other stuff. But that's just an argument from silence, right?
Yeah.
Josephus doesn't mention Claudius' expulsion of the Jews from Rome. Suetonius mentions it. But we know Herod, I won't go through all the references this time. He was super paranoid. He was violent. Like, he killed the supporters of Antonius after becoming king. He had Aristobulus III, his brother-in-law, and the high priest drowned. He had Hyrcanus II executed over alleged plot. He killed his wife. He killed his mother-in-law. He killed 3 of his sons, right? Crazy. Yeah, he was crazy. He had 300 officers killed around the same time, an episode involving Alexander and Aristobulus. And there were some Pharisees that prophesied that his kingdom would not remain and like would fall into somebody else's hands. Well, what did he do? He ordered them all to be killed, right? And like Bethlehem, it's a tiny little hamlet. We're talking about maybe a dozen babies or so. It's horrific. That's pretty terrible. But Josephus is writing for a Greco-Roman audience. Like, they were used to like, just like, oh, you don't want the baby? Like the way that we do abortion today, sadly. That they were like that, but with infant exposure. They just would set them out in the wild and let animals eat them if they didn't want the child. And so he's writing to an audience that already is like dead babies, big whoop-de-doo. So maybe that was his silence. Maybe he just didn't know about it. But that's just not a good argument against the historicity of it. So does that make sense?
Yeah, so just one little thing. What was the timeline then? So what is like about the timeline from the birth story? Like what, like just to understand.
Yeah,
how
so
was
this
it?
was probably about 4 AD.
Yeah,
Six,
no.
6 to 4.
I want to ask like how, like where did it start, and then like when did they get to Egypt? Not time wise, like the time when it happened, but like the order of events, like that I can understand this.
Sure. So I think that Jesus would have been born, and that would be maybe 6, 4, something like that. Then I think the flight to Egypt happens like a couple years later, because it talks about Jesus being like basically like a toddler at that point, right? Take the child. It doesn't say take the baby. Like the Greek word that's used is more of what would you describe a toddler with? And so this is years later. Then there's the flight to Egypt. And so I think there's the birth, and then there's the purification that happens 40 days after. I think then they go back to a house in Bethlehem. It never specifies where this happened, if this was Galilee or not. And then they do the flight to Egypt. Then Joseph comes back. He intends to return to Bethlehem probably a year or so later. And then he gets wind of all of this. And so I'm not spelling it out perfectly in my head, because I'd have to like really kind of think and calculate it out. But roughly, that's basically what it would be.
So this with Bethlehem. So they went from Jerusalem to Bethlehem and then to Egypt.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah, but this Bethlehem before Egypt is not mentioned, no? Like
it's not mentioned in Luke, but again, for whatever reason, his source may have just skipped it. And I said, at worst, Luke just kind of assumed like, oh, okay. And then they went back to Nazareth. Like that's the at worst. Or like I said, Luke is just compressing the events. Maybe he's aware of Matthew. I don't know. I mean, some people think he wasn't. Some people think he was. Maybe he's like, I want to talk about something else. You know, they can already get that from Matthew's gospel. Maybe he just decides not to include it. We don't really know. With historians all the time have overlap and there's omissions, and we don't really know. And we would just be kind of arguing from silence. Like if he knew it, surely he would tell us about it. Well, would he? You know, we already talked about Josephus. There's Claudius expels all the Jews from Rome, but he doesn't mention it. We don't know why historians are going to include something sometimes and sometimes they won't.
Okay.
Yep. Does that help a little bit, Tim?
Yeah, it helps a bit.
Yeah. So, like I said, talkaboutdoubts.com. If you really want somebody to go through and bust some Bart Ehrman contradictions, and it would really help you and keep you thinking right and trusting the gospel, trusting the word, so that you can obey the word and you're not struggling or whatever. Check it out if you want to. If you want to do the self-study and just check out my videos, there's also recommended book list in the description of every one of my videos. You can check those out too. And but we're here for you if you need us.
Thank you, brother.
All right. Take care. Bye. All right. I hope this was helpful. I hope this was good stuff for you guys. And so thank you. If you liked the stream, thank you for doing that. I probably should have asked for that earlier. Be sure to share these. Tell your friends about it. And so I've been taking a gang of notes. I hope that's kind of showing up here. And I'm always going to be adding more. And so I realized, wait, trying to memorize a bunch of historical facts and spit them out doesn't really work. But now that I have a little more notes, I think these are going to get cleaner and get a little better. So anyways, I got to run. I got to get going to work. And so thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.